Welcome everyone to the Lord of Mysteries novel summary series on Ani Monolith. In the previous part, Klein continues his investigation into the mysterious events surrounding Welch's death and the Antigonus family's notebook. Later, at the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein encounters Leonard, who questions him about his survival when Welch and Naya committed suicide. They speculate on various theories, including the idea that Klein may have unknowingly been a vessel for an unknown evil existence. Klein uses his experiences and knowledge of detective stories to form a plausible explanation, but Leonard remains suspicious, suggesting that the unknown entity might have influenced Klein. The conversation ends with lingering doubts, but Klein stays focused on finding answers. When he arrived at the armory, Klein saw Rozanne along with a strange man. As soon as she saw Klein, Rozanne asked if Klein had officially become a Beyonder. Of course, Klein confirmed this information and explained that he had drunk the seer potion. Klein also asked Rozanne about the identity of the strange man. However, before Rozanne's introduction, he speculated that the man might be from Nighthawks or one of the company's two remaining civilian employees. And just as Klein had guessed, Rozanne introduced the man's name and position, as well as explained why she and he were together at the armory. He's Bredt. Our colleague. He wishes to change slots with me to free up the night after tomorrow. He plans on going to the theater in the North Borough with his wife to watch The Prideful One. It's to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary. After being introduced, Bredt greeted Klein and told him that he was brave in choosing to become a Beyonder because Bredt had been told by a Beyonder that the less he knew about mysteries and dangers, the longer he would live. So becoming a Beyonder must face many dangers and even risk losing one's life. However, Rozanne spoke up to reassure Klein because she thought that seer was just a support, so he wouldn't have to face many dangers directly. Of course, Rozanne did not forget to remind Klein that if he wants to maintain safety, he must stay away from connecting with unknown existences. Rozanne then asked why Klein came to the armory, at which point Klein replied that he came to receive 30 regular bullets. Then, after Bredt gave Klein the requested number of bullets, he and Rozanne went up the stairs together and out of the company. Arriving at Zutland Street, the two separated from each other. So Klein went to the shooting range to practice. The more he practiced, the more experienced he became and his body became healthier. After finishing work, Klein left the shooting range and happened to see Melissa walking on the street. It turned out that Melissa was going to the market to buy more ingredients. But what surprised Klein was not this, but why Melissa didn't rent a carriage to travel when the distance from the school to this area was very far. However, Melissa replied that she wanted to save information to prevent bad situations that could happen to her family. Faced with his sister's detailed calculations, Klein tried to convince him that he was completely capable of paying for those things. Then the next morning, Melissa agreed to go to school by carriage, and Benson and Klein left home to go to the company. Upon entering the Blackthorn Company's office, Klein saw old Neil and Rozanne. Then, after exchanging greetings with Rozanne, Klein followed old Neil to the armory to continue studying mysticism. When Klein asked what today's lesson would be about, Neil replied that they would learn the basics and the complex, along with some interesting tricks. Neil then pointed to the silver chain wrapped around his wrist, with a pure white moonstone hanging from the end of the chain. While Klein was wondering what the interesting technique old Neil mentioned was, he was assigned a confusing task by Neil. That is, Klein had to make 2 cups of coffee, one of which had something unpleasant added to it. Whatever that thing was, it depended on Klein's preferences and imagination. After receiving the request, Klein immediately made coffee because he was no stranger to this. And when he finished, Klein thought about it, picked up some soil from the sole of his shoe, and put it in a cup of coffee. To make sure there was nothing unusual, Klein also carefully used a spoon to dissolve it in the coffee mixture. After giving 2 cups of coffee to old Neil, Klein saw Neil holding the chain with the moonstone attached to a cup, then he released his hand and let the moonstone almost touch the coffee mixture before stopping. Again. Neil then confirmed that this glass was the same glass that Klein put in the nasty stuff. Before old Neil's completely accurate conclusion, Klein speculated that it was due to Neil's mystical powers, or because of the moonstone. Then Neil explained carefully as follows: this is known as pendulum dowsing in divination. It's also called spirit dowsing. It relies on your astral projection's connection with the spirit world and the cosmos to communicate with spiritual intelligence through the aid of natural materials such as crystals, gems, or special metals. The good and bad of things can be divined. Let's talk about the 2 cups of coffee. A counterclockwise motion implies bad, while a clockwise motion is good. If it doesn't move, it's neither good nor bad. You can write the statement on a piece of paper. Take note, it's a statement and not a question. When seeing that Klein was still confused about the last note, old Neil used it to give a practical example so that Klein could rely on it to learn the secret to practicing the technique. Neil said to Klein, "You cannot use is so-and-so willing to be my fiancé, but you should instead use so-and-so is willing to be my fiancé. Write it on a piece of paper and place it on the desk. Then use your non-dominant hand to hold the pendulum chain." "Take note, use your non-dominant hand," said old Neil with a chuckle. "When doing so, keep your arm straight. Adjust the chain's length and make the moonstone hang just above the piece of paper to the point of almost touching what we wrote. Then, close your eyes and repeat the sentence 7 times in your mind. Open your eyes when you are done and see if the spirit pendulum turns or not. If it doesn't, close your eyes again and repeat the process until it moves." Luckily, Klein is a smart person, so he grasped the core of the technique using this moonstone. When the moonstone's motion is counterclockwise, the answer is no. When it is clockwise, the answer is yes. Hearing that, old Neil changed the answer to be more correct, which is unfavorable and favorable. Faced with the magic and convenience of this mystical technique, Klein quickly thought of applying it in practice in cases such as checking to see if his food had been poisoned by someone else, or if he was lost. If you go into the wild forest and see fruits there, you will know which fruits are edible. Of course, Klein is also aware that this technique of divination should not be abused unless it is necessary. Because experience has the price of experience, if you mistakenly eat a poisonous fruit, the poison of that fruit may not be deadly. On the contrary, it can be used to make certain pharmaceuticals. After that, Klein decided to save money to buy a moonstone or a quality gem to be able to apply this interesting divination skill. However, old Neil said that Klein could get the item from Nighthawk's warehouse because he remembered that there was a yellow quartz and a silver chain in the warehouse. Before this suggestion, Klein hesitated because he was not an official member of the Nighthawks. However, old Neil believes that Klein has now become a Beyonder, so this can be considered a benefit that any Beyonder can receive. The only difference is that if you become an official employee of the state government, your salary will be higher than that of a civilian employee. Hearing that, Klein had the thought of going to Captain Dunn to ask for the item. Then old Neil turned to the main topic of today's lesson, which is the most basic knowledge of mysticism. Before starting the lesson, old Neil asked Klein what he knew about symbolism. Hearing that, Klein immediately responded, "Regardless of the spirit world or the illusory cosmos, as well as the unknown realms, they are beyond our sensory world. It's not something that can be accurately described by the information our ears, nose, and eyes obtain. What we obtain are simply indescribable experiences and direct revelations. They also appear as abstract characters or pictorial symbols. These symbols represent different items and different meanings." Before Klein's understanding, old Neil did not forget to applaud, and he immediately drew a symbol. He drew a short curve. Following that, he added a few vertical lines beneath the curve. He looked up at Klein and asked Klein to guess the meaning it represented. However, contrary to Neil's expectations, Klein answered wrongly and even somewhat stupidly. Then Neil answered that the symbol meant a constellation: Bumper Harvest Constellation, Thunderous Constellation, the Frost Constellation, and the name of that constellation as well as several constellations mentioned by Neil later made Klein feel that they were too simple to the point of simplicity. Seeming to understand Klein's thoughts, old Neil said that in the past, Emperor Rozanne wanted to change their names to Virgo Star and Cancer Star but was unsuccessful because he could not go against traditional values. Old Neil then taught Klein a lot of knowledge related to divination as well as how symbolism would have auxiliary uses for the seer and those with mystical abilities. Thanks to his greatly improved memory ability after using the seer potion, Klein was able to remember all the vast knowledge that old Neil had taught. However, old Neil reminded and also warned Klein that he could not depend entirely on mystical abilities, but also had to regularly cultivate and study a lot to make that knowledge his own. Then when old Neil announced that today's class was over, Klein asked for his opinion on how he would save money to join the Divination Club on House Street in Northborough to become a true seer. When stating this intention, Klein thought that it was impossible to hide the Nighthawks from discovering his actions, so he would voluntarily declare it. Hearing that, old Neil said that his idea was identical to Daly's because she also wanted to become a real spirit medium. However, Neil wondered why Klein had to save money when Klein could have asked Dunn Smith to sign a confirmation to have more funds to carry out this work. It's called work because Neil said the Nighthawks regularly check such mystical and spiritual organizations, because in the Divination Club, there may be cultists or members of evil organizations lurking inside. So in other words, Klein joining the Divination Club can be seen as an investigation mission by the Nighthawks in the name of the Beyonder. After discussing important matters, old Neil asked Klein what unpleasant thing he had put in the coffee, and when he received the answer from Klein that he had put dirt in it, Neil felt uncomfortable. Both panicked and quickly ordered Klein to throw that cup of coffee away. Listening to old Neil's words, Klein dumped his cup of coffee and quickly climbed the stairs to return to the company's main lobby. By the time he arrived at Blackthorn Security Company, Klein grasped the layout of the rooms. Entering the door is a spacious reception hall, with a sofa and a table. Passing through the partition is the inner area. The 3 rooms on the left side of the hallway are, in order, Lady Oriana's accounting room, the room with several beds that look like sofas, and the place with the stairs leading to the underground. The 3 rooms on the right are the office of Captain Dunn Smith, the office for civilian employees with typewriters, and the recreation room of official members of the Nighthawks. And Klein had seen Leonard play a very familiar game on Earth with other members in the recreation room. Of course, the name of the game was changed, but the way of playing remained the same. After determining what needed to be done, Klein went to the civilian employee's office and began using an Axon typewriter to compose an application to send to Dunn Smith. Although it was a bit unfamiliar at first because Klein had never come into contact with words in this world, thanks to the original Klein's memories, Klein finally completed the content he wanted. Klein then went to Dunn Smith's room and he quickly signed his signature. Of course, Dunn also correctly guessed that Klein's action was instructed by old Neil. After receiving the captain's approval, Klein happily left and did not forget to remind himself to practice his cogitation and shooting skills. Of course, he also did not forget to practice and learn more information about history. Then in the coming time, Klein completely devoted all his mind and effort to the goals.